The gate was tied shut with rope, still pale from the mercantile shelf, not yet gone gray with sun the way old rope does. That was the first thing the gunslinger noticed about the Doyle place, riding into the Texas hill country in the second week of October 1878, with dust on his coat and 30 miles behind him. The second thing was the rifle. A woman stood on the porch, holding it low against her hip, not raised, not aimed anywhere, just present in her hands, the way a latch is present on a door. She watched him the whole way up the road, and did not speak until he was close enough that a shout wouldn't carry past the fence. "That's far enough." He stopped his horse there, said he was passing through, that a man in town had mentioned fence down along the north pasture, and that he'd take honest work for honest pay, and no questions running in either direction. She studied him a long while, long enough that he understood she wasn't deciding whether to trust him, she was deciding whether she had a choice. 4 days, she said. Coin, not scrip. You sleep in the barn. You don't come near that gate after dark. And you don't ask why. That suited him fine. It always did. A man who rides without his real name behind him learns to want exactly 2 things from any job, and she'd offered both before he'd said another word. Her name was Naomi Doyle. There was a girl, too, 4 years old, watching him unload his saddle from behind her mother's skirt with the particular stillness of a child taught that strangers are to be studied before they are trusted. Some promises get made in a single frightened night and spend years afterward waiting to be kept. This is the story of one of those, and of 2 people who kept it without ever meaning to. He noticed the first wrong thing that same night. He'd come down from the barn loft near midnight for water and found her on the porch steps, not sitting, standing, facing the road with her arms wrapped around herself against no particular cold. She wasn't waiting on anyone. Nobody rides a hill country road at midnight with good intentions. She was listening for something that hadn't come yet, and from the set of her shoulders, he understood she'd been listening every night for longer than he'd been on the place. He went back up without a word. It wasn't his business, and he had 4 days of fence to finish. The second wrong thing came the next morning, small and easy to miss. Naomi called the girl in from the yard for her breakfast and used the name Josie, plain as anything. The child kept playing in the dirt by the well a full breath too long, the way a person hesitates over a word in a language they've only just learned. Then she looked up, late, and came running as if nothing had happened at all. A man who has spent 20 years reading How Liars Move learns to read children the same way, because children haven't yet learned to hide the beat before they answer. He worked the fence through the heat of the day and said nothing about any of it, because saying something was how a man found himself owning a stranger's trouble, and he'd made a long practice of owning nothing that wasn't his. It was near 4 in the afternoon, the sun dropping orange through the live oaks, when the girl came out to the north line by herself. Naomi was inside, humming something low through the kitchen window. Josie crossed the pasture in that headlong toddler way, all forward motion and no plan, and stopped beside him and put one small hand flat on his knee to keep her balance. He waited. He'd learned that waiting worked better than asking. "Sir," she said, in the plain, unbothered voice children use for facts they've simply always known. "She's not my real mama." He went still, not startled, just stopped, the wire cutters loose in his hand, while 2 days of small, wrong things rearranged themselves into a shape he didn't like at all. He looked up at the house. Naomi Doyle stood at the kitchen window with her hands gone motionless in the wash basin, watching them, and it was plain from her face that she had heard every word. But it wasn't fear on her face. He'd seen fear plenty of times, and this wasn't the shape of it. It was the look of a woman who had just realized she recognized him, too. Naomi didn't come down off the porch right away. She stood at that window long enough for the water in the basin to go still, long enough that he understood she was deciding something, the same way she'd decided something the first day, watching him ride up the road with the rifle low against her hip. When she finally came out, she sent Josie back to the house first, gentle about it, no alarm in her voice, just a mother's practiced redirect. "Go on and find your doll, sweetheart. I'll be in directly." And the girl went without argument, the way children go when they trust the adult more than they're curious about the moment. Then Naomi crossed the pasture to where he stood, with the wire cutters still loose in his hand, and stopped an arm's length off, and looked at him the way a person looks at a photograph they've been shown once, years ago, trying to match it against a face. "You've got a scar over your left brow," she said. "Thin, runs into the hairline." He didn't answer. There wasn't a question in it yet.
"My sister described a man like that to me, 2 years back near Waco. She said he rode with 4 others, hired men, and that when it came to it, he was the one who looked at her and the baby and made a decision the other 4 didn't know he'd made until he was already doing it." Naomi's hands had gone still at her sides. "She said he never gave his name, said he told her to run west and not stop for towns, and then he rode ahead of his own party and put himself between them and a fork in the road so they'd lose an hour arguing about which way she'd gone." Now he understood what he was looking at in her face. Not fear, recognition. And behind the recognition, something that had been waiting a long time to be said out loud. "Your sister," he said. "Rachel." Naomi's jaw tightened around the name, like it cost her something to spend it. "Josie's mother. Not me. I'm her aunt, and I have been telling this county I'm her mother and myself a widow for going on 2 years now, because the truth got Rachel killed 8 months after that night on the Waco Road, and I will not let it get her daughter killed too." He set the wire cutters down slow, giving his hands something to do besides show that they'd gone unsteady. 2 years he'd carried that night, the way a man carries a job he walked off of. A loose thread he'd told himself didn't matter, since he'd never learned what became of the woman and the child after he turned his horse around at that fork and let them ride on. He had told himself, more than once, that a kindness done blind, with no name attached and no way to check on it, was still a kindness. It hadn't occurred to him that not knowing was its own kind of cowardice, that a man could do one decent thing and then spend 2 years not finding out if it held. "Who was after her?" he said, not a question either. "Silas Cutler." She watched his face when she said it, and whatever she was looking for, she found it. "You know the name?"
"I worked for him. Once. 4 days, same as this fence." He'd told himself that, too, that a man could do a short, ugly job and walk away clean of it, and here was the proof that nothing a man does for Silas Cutler stays short. He said it was a debt matter, a woman who owed him money and ran off with something that wasn't hers. The something wasn't money. Naomi's voice had gone very flat, very careful, the voice of someone reciting a thing she'd rehearsed so it wouldn't break in the telling. Rachel was his wife's sister. When his wife died, birthing a boy that didn't live either, there was a will that named Rachel's line ahead of Cutler's kin if he had no living child. His father-in-law's cattle interest, near 11,000 head, and the water rights under half of 3 counties. Cutler needed that will to mean nothing. A dead sister-in-law meant nothing. A dead sister-in-law with a living daughter meant a lawyer could still make trouble for him 20 years from now, when that daughter came of age and started asking questions about her mother's inheritance. The pieces he'd carried loose for 2 years locked into a shape he didn't want. "He's not looking for a debt," Naomi said. "He's looking for a 4-year-old girl, because so long as she's alive, his claim on that land is a claim resting on a lie. And Waco's 4 days' ride from here, and last month a man came through Comfort asking after a widow with a small daughter. And I have been standing on that porch every night since, listening for horses." Out past the fence line, west toward the road, a thin thread of dust had risen, where the land went flat and pale in the late sun. Too far off yet to be riders, could as easy be cattle, could be nothing at all. Neither of them looked away from it. The dust didn't resolve into riders. It resolved into nothing. A hot wind working loose soil along the road, gone within the quarter hour, and Naomi's shoulders came down 1/2 inch when she finally let herself believe it. But she didn't go back to the house right away, and neither did he. They stood at the fence line a while longer, the way people do after a scare that turns out to be nothing, needing a minute before their bodies believe what their eyes already know. "You should have told me the first day," he said finally. "I don't tell anyone the first day. Or the 10th. There's a reason I put a rifle on you before you'd said your name." She looked at him sideways. "You didn't give one, I noticed. Not then, not since." "Wasn't going to lie to you, and the truth wasn't going to help either of us." She almost smiled at that, the first close thing to it he'd seen from her. "That's the most honest thing a man's said to me on this porch in 2 years. He asked her then, the thing he'd been turning over since she'd said the name Cutler, how much time they likely had. She didn't know for certain. That was the trouble with a man like Cutler. He didn't ride in loud, he sent inquiries first. A rider through Comfort asking easy questions at the Mercantile. Another maybe through Kerrville by now. Patient work, the kind that took weeks to close a circle before anyone came through the gate with intent. Which meant, he told her, that they likely had days rather than hours. Which was worse in its way. Hours a person could just endure. Days meant choosing. That evening he ate at her table for the first time, the girl between them working a biscuit apart with both hands, unbothered by anything, the way 4-year-olds are unbothered by the weight sitting on the grown people around them. Naomi watched him across the lamplight with an expression he couldn't fully read. Not trust, not yet, but something adjacent to it, the look of a woman doing arithmetic on a man's face. "Why'd you turn around?" she asked, once Josie had gone down for the night in the back room. "At that fork. Cutler's men behind you, 4 riders who'd have followed you anywhere you pointed them. Nobody would have known if you'd just kept going with them." He turned the coffee cup a quarter turn on the table, not drinking from it. "I'd have known." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I've got." He looked at the door to the back room, where the girl's breathing had gone slow and even. "I've done a lot of jobs I don't look at too close afterward. That was going to be one more, until it wasn't. Man reaches a point where he either stops or he doesn't, and I didn't plan on stopping that day. It just happened to be the day." Naomi was quiet a long moment. "Rachel used to say the same kind of thing, that good and bad aren't something a person decides once. It's a thing that happens to them in pieces, usually when they're not looking for it to." "She sounds like she was worth riding for." "She was." Naomi's voice caught, just slightly, on the word was, and she didn't try to hide it from him. "Josie doesn't remember her. She was 18 months old when it happened. Everything that girl knows about her mother, she knows because I chose what to tell her and when. That's a strange kind of power to hold over a child. deciding when she's ready for the truth of her own life. You held it right, seems to me. She's alive, and she's fed, and she's got someone standing on a porch every night making sure she stays that way. For now. Naomi looked toward the window, toward the dark road beyond it. Cutler doesn't stop asking questions. That's the thing about a man like that. He doesn't need to be right about where she is. He just needs to be patient about being wrong in fewer and fewer places, until one day he isn't wrong anymore. Outside, far off, a coyote called, and another answered it, and under that ordinary sound, neither of them said what they were both thinking. That 4 days of fence work was almost up, and that a man with no name and nothing tying him to this place had every reason in the world to ride on when it was done. And neither of them yet knew if he would. The 4th day came in gray, a low sky pressing down over the hill country, with the particular stillness that old-timers call waiting weather. He finished the north fence by mid-morning, the last of the wire drawn tight and true, and stood a while with his hand on the top rail, like a man reluctant to let go of a thing he'd only just finished. Naomi found him there. She had his 4 days' pay wrapped in a cloth, coin, not scrip, same as she'd promised, and she held it out to him without a word. Because there wasn't an easy way to say what they both knew, that the job was done, and that done jobs were what men like him rode away from. He didn't take it, not yet. "There's a way this goes," he said, "where I ride out today with your money in my pocket and never think on this place again, and Cutler's rider comes through in a week or a month, and you're standing on that porch alone with a rifle and a 4-year-old, same as you were before I ever came up your road." "And there's a way it goes where you stay," Naomi said, "and I've got a stranger under my roof with a debt to a man like Cutler that I don't fully understand, and a name I still don't know, and a girl who's already asked me twice this morning if you're going to be here tomorrow." "She asked that?" "She did." Naomi's mouth tightened, not unkindly. "Children keep better ledgers than we give them credit for. She's counted the men who've come through this place and stayed longer than a meal. You're the first." He looked toward the house, where Josie sat on the porch step, working a piece of straw between her fingers with the fierce concentration small children bring to tasks that don't matter at all, and thought about the fork in the road outside Waco, and the 2 years he'd spent not knowing what he'd bought with that choice. "I'm not a man who fixes things," he told her. "I know how to leave. I know how to make trouble stop being my trouble. I don't know that I know how to be the reason a place stays quiet." "Nobody knows that going in," Naomi said. "Rachel didn't. I didn't the day I told the county I was a widow and started answering to a name that wasn't mine. A person learns it by doing it, same as fence work." It was near noon when the rider came. 1 man, not 4. Cutler's kind of patience, a single rider sent to look and report rather than to act, which meant they had more time than they'd feared, but less peace than they'd hoped. He came up the road slow, unhurried, the posture of a man asking directions rather than trouble, and stopped at the gate, the same rope-pale gate the gunslinger had ridden past 4 days before. "Afternoon." The rider's eyes went past Naomi, past the girl on the steps, landed on the gunslinger standing at the fence with the wire cutters still in his hand. Something crossed his face. Not recognition exactly, more the look of a man filing away a detail to report on later. "Looking for a widow woman, name of Doyle. Word in comfort was she might be out this way." "You've found the place," Naomi said, before the man could ask anything further. "I'm Naomi Doyle. This is my hired man, finishing up my fence, and that's my daughter on the steps. Who's asking?" The rider's gaze held on the gunslinger a beat too long.
Man I work for is settling an estate matter, nothing that concerns hired help. He touched his hat, the gesture of a man closing a conversation he'd already gotten what he needed from. Ma'am. He turned his horse and rode back the way he'd come, unhurried, and neither of them moved until the dust of him was long gone past the tree line.
"He'll report it," Naomi said quietly. "A hired man who looked at him like that isn't hired help. Cutler will know inside the week."
"Then we've got inside the week," he said, and set the wire cutters down on the fence post for good. To be ready for him instead of waiting on him. He picked up her cloth of coin from where she'd left it on the rail and pressed it back into her hand, closing her fingers around it. "Keep it," he said. "I didn't finish the job. Fence was never the job." Naomi looked down at the coin, then up at him, and for the first time since he'd ridden up her road 4 days before, she asked him a question she hadn't dared ask a stranger. "What should Josie call you then, if you're staying?" He looked at the girl on the steps who had stopped worrying the straw between her fingers and was watching them both with that grave, unhurried patience some children are simply born with. "Reckon that's up to her," he said. "I've gone without a name a long time. Might be time I let someone give me one."